It used to be that whenever there was a large South Asian polity, there haven't actually been that many throughout history, but certainly in ancient times and early medieval times, if there was a large South Asian polity, Buddhism tended to do pretty well. And that's because these large polities had massive wealth extraction capabilities. That's what big states, they're able to extract wealth through violence or the threat of violence on a massive scale. And a lot of that wealth would then be channeled towards the Buddhist institution. Now, of course, other faith systems were patronized as well. If you're going to be the ruler of a large portion of South Asia, you sort of have to rule syncretistically if you want to last very long. But Buddhism in particular relied upon this sort of patronage to flourish. So, for example, you look at the ancient Mauryan Empire. Well, the third great Mauryan emperor, Ashoka, supposedly or traditionally, he converts to Buddhism, and then he lavishes on Buddhism quite a bit of money. He's building Buddhist structures, Buddhist monuments. He's donating money and land grants to monasteries and universities. He's organizing and paying for conferences, doctrinal conferences, missionary work, you name it. So Buddhism does very well under Ashoka with this state patronage. And Buddhism in particular, why Buddhism in particular? Why is Buddhism so particularly dependent upon state patronage? Because the core of the Buddhist establishment is the monastery and the monks who live within it. And of course, these monks live off the donations, or at least largely live off the donations of others, the labor of others, sometimes even the slave labor of others. So you can see how important, even critical it is for the Buddhist institution, whose core is, the monasteries, to get a piece of this government largesse. These guys prospered for centuries off of state largesse in large part. It didn't hurt that, Buddhism spread into Central Asia, so you got those trade routes, including much of the Silk Road, connecting so many civilizational nodes of Afro-Eurasia. Buddhism spreads into that area, so the Buddhist establishment gets to reap the economic benefits of that trade route wealth as well. And so it was very critical for these monasteries and whatnot to be able to get a king or an empire to grant them land, to grant them, the income from this village or that village or this group of villages. I mean, this was very, very critical to the prosperity of Buddhism in India. But unfortunately for Buddhism and its reliance on centralization, India entered a period of political decentralization from about the 600s on. So now you have these smaller states, obviously with less wealth extraction capacity. These smaller states become battlegrounds, a competition over government largesse. And for one reason or another, the Buddhists really lose out in favor of the Hindus, the Brahminical sects, and even the Jains and some others, but especially the Hindus. Why that would be, we're not totally sure. I mean, you can point to a lot of things. Could be some individual Brahmins were able to gain the ear of the kings better. Monasteries may have been financially mismanaged during this period. Definitely within Hinduism, there was a surge of movements, and particularly the Bhakti movement, this devotional movement that may have led to a decline in Buddhism. And all the while, Buddhism is sort of losing some of its distinctiveness as it merges closer and closer to, Hinduism. It becomes just sort of another branch of Hinduism in many ways, at least on a maybe more popular grassroots level. Any of these, or all of them together, or something else could have contributed to this, but for whatever reason, Buddhism began to lose ground in terms of patronage in a major way during this decentralized period to Hinduism and other faith systems. It didn't help that this period of decentralization was sort of kicked off by a series of invasions by a people called the White Huns or the Hephthalites. And these guys came in from the northwest, of course, evidently leaving a trail of destroyed Buddhist monasteries in their wake. That whole northwestern area, that was a Buddhist heartland for centuries, and the White Huns devastated it, reportedly. So you got that White Hun invasion, and then you have several centuries of decentralization and Buddhists losing out on government patronage. But the worst was yet to come when the Muslim-led armies came in from the northwest, talking the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s. These are Turks, Afghans, Mongols. When they swept into India, that was the real proverbial nail in the coffin for Buddhism in India, probably. You want to point to one thing that might have snuffed it out, that's it. Buddhism had already been replaced largely in Central Asia, or was being replaced by Islam. So all the wealth, all the economic benefits that came from being the dominant faith system in these crossroads of Central Asia, that's all going to Islam now. Then northwestern India starts to convert or be conquered, and Buddhism begins to dry up in those areas. Like I mentioned, the 1000s, the 1100s, the 1200s, you've got Turks, Mongols, Afghans sweeping into India. These guys come in, they destroy Buddhist temples, they loot, desecrate, reportedly slaughtering monks and nuns, burning texts. And when they're all done, you know, Buddhism is mostly erased as a major religion in India. Those monks and nuns who escaped did so because they were able to run north into the mountains, the foothills, or into Tibet, or run far south into far southern India. Now, the city of Mathura provides a pretty good example of that, actually. Here in Mathura, this is an ancient city said to be the birthplace of Krishna, incarnation of Vishnu. This is a city that was mentioned by Megasthenes, the great Greek ambassador to the ancient Mauryan court. And he mentioned Mathura as a great city. Several Chinese travelers attest that this was a Buddhist center as well. This was a great Buddhist center. Many, many monasteries, something like 20 monasteries. Many more monasteries than Hindu temples, reportedly, here in Mathura. But then you've got the White Hun invasion, you've got several centuries of decentralization, and then in 1018, Mahmud of Ghazni shows up with his armies. He sacks the city, he loots it, he ransacks it, and 5 centuries later, the Delhi Sultanate does essentially the same thing. Of course, by the time of the Muslim conquests, Buddhism, fortunately for Buddhism, had taken root elsewhere in the world, in other regions, Southeast Asia, Tibet, China, Korea, Japan, and elsewhere. And so it would survive all of this, but not so much in South Asia, where it was born. And it's interesting, when you look at South Asian states and Buddhist populations, you have significant Buddhist populations, obviously, way down south in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, some of the Himalayan states. But in the big states, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, very, very few Buddhists. In Pakistan, it's like 0.1%, not even 0.1%. It's a few thousand people practice Buddhism. In Bangladesh, it's like 0.7%. And in India, where Buddhism was born, it's like 1% or less than 1% of the population is Buddhist. Here in Mathura, which used to be this great Buddhist center with its 20 monasteries and travelers from China coming through to collect texts and whatnot, something like 0.04% of the population today is Buddhist.